Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're looking at a really urgent situation at Northern Lake. It's a retirement stable, and they're facing, well, a potential infrastructure collapse. And this deep dive is critical because, honestly, the safety of retired racehorses hangs in the balance. We're talking about famous ones, too, like Meisho Doto. It all comes down to funding an emergency rebuild.
Right. And our mission here is to unpack that funding squeeze. Because the sources show it's not just about the building itself decaying.
Oh.
Yeah, it points to maybe a bigger sort of structural issue and how these long-term retirement places are funded. We really need to look at why the money they expected didn't come through and this unique global approach they had to take.
Okay, let's start with the state of the stables then. How bad is it?
It's bad. We're talking about a structure that's over half a century old.
50 years.
Wow, exactly. And it shows, the sources mention holes, actual holes in the roof, puddles forming inside the stall.
Inside where the horses live.
Yeah.
That's dangerous.
Extremely. The building's clearly reached its limit. It needs rebuilding like yesterday.
So what's stopping them? Just getting it done?
Well, that's where it gets tricky. First off, logistics. The stable is actually on rented land.
Okay, so that adds complexity.
Definitely. The sources mention complicated issues involved about who's even responsible for major reconstruction.
Right.
But the biggest hurdle, the real wall they hit, was financial.
Right. You'd think, especially with famous horses there, that institutional support, maybe from the racing authorities, would cover an emergency like this.
You would absolutely think that. And Northern Lake was planning this reconstruction. They applied for a subsidy from the JRA's foundation organization, you know, the Japan Racing Association. And the amount they got was much, much smaller than expected, dramatically smaller.
Oh, no, so that just blew up their plans.
Pretty much. It forced them immediately to downsize the whole project, scale back the stable plans from what they originally wanted, what they probably needed.
And even after cutting things back, they still didn't have enough.
Exactly. The sources confirm there was still a really significant funding gap left. It's kind of heartbreaking, isn't it? A place looking after horses like Meisho Doto having to scramble like this just for basic safety.
So what do they do? How do you fill a gap like that under pressure?
They had to get creative. Really creative. They basically tossed out the usual playbook and launched their first ever crowdfunding campaign.
Crowdfunding for stable infrastructure.
Yep. Kicked off on October 24th, which the source notes was a Friday. Now, they committed to doing some work themselves to save costs, you know, the staff pitching in.
Right, sweat equity.
But there's only so much you can do yourself when you're building completely new stables from the ground up.
And crowdfunding relies on reaching enough people. How did they plan to do that, especially if the domestic funding fell short?
That was the key part of the strategy. They specifically chose a platform called Readyfor.
Why that one?
Because, and this was crucial, it supports overseas credit cards. That had been a major worry. So they were banking on international fans stepping up, people who follow horses like Doto globally.
Precisely. It allowed those overseas followers, the ones invested in, say, Meisho Doto having a safe home, to contribute directly.
Right.
It was a way to make the campaign, potentially.
Yeah.
Well, the staff called it epic.
Relying on the global fan base as an emergency funding mechanism, that's quite something.
It is, and incredibly high stakes, because there's another major pressure point.
What's that?
Yeah, yes. Winter's coming. In that region, the ground freezes, snow falls, construction just stops. So they have this very narrow window to get the money and get the building built before it becomes impossible.
Wow. Talk about pressure. Okay, so wrapping this up then, what's the takeaway for you listening?
Well, it seems to be a story of urgent, like life or death need for these animals running smack into resource problems.
Yeah, and the only way out was this inventive direct appeal to the public, really leveraging that global horse racing fandom. Exactly, and maybe a final thought to leave you with. Consider this. The building was literally at its limit. Their only real option was this emergency international crowdfunding push just to beat the winter deadline, after expected institutional money didn't fully materialize.
Right.
So what does that tell us about the ongoing, maybe systemic infrastructure challenges these retirement farms face? Especially when the usual support systems prove, well, insufficient. It really makes you wonder whose responsibility these champions ultimately become once they're off the track.